Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origins and evolution of American government. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion, and here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you. And for the third day in a row this week, I think we've made it. We will, after today's program, have completed our weekly obligations and our mission here at the Virtual Center. We're scheduled for 3 days of live programs, and with the campaign getting closer and closer, I'm becoming more and more nervous as to whether it's going to have to miss a few. But so far, we're hanging in there. And today was iffy. I got to share a story with you. I got a call this morning around 10 o'clock about an event here locally, which I didn't know about. And it was a senior citizen event, and there was a luncheon associated with it. And it was out at our local convention center here. So I put on a necktie and spiffied up a bit and grabbed some cards, and off I went to politic, as it were. And another candidate, a friend of mine who I know is running for a different office, was there also. And so the two of us were there, and we were standing outside the arena, and the thinking is that they would be filing out, and we would give them a card and tell them who we were and what we were about and all that. Well, the people that managed the armory really got uptight about the fact that a large group like this, they didn't want us politicking there, and it is a little bit like ambulance chasing, to be honest with you, and I could kind of understand, but they said, we can't really bring a group together under, pretenses of something and then turn it into a political event. And I can kind of understand that. But so as I was standing there waiting for the people to come out, I started to think this is going to conflict with the program. I was supposed to be on the air at 1 o'clock, and I don't know that this would be over by 1. But as it turns out, I had plenty of time, so here I am. And so anyway, I was talking to the other candidate there, and I told him, I said, we are in the business of ambulance chasing, and we're going to have to be a little bit careful. I said, every time we see 5 cars in the same place, I mean, even if it's a car accident, you can't go and start to hand out cards, and I think we're going to have to be a little bit more politic, a little bit more careful, as it were. But anyway, so I'm guessing that we're going to experience some of that. We're going to starting next weekend, and for the last month of the campaign, the last 4 weekends before the election, we're going to do some serious door knocking, and I expect the same kind of treatment. Reception will confront us there also. I mean, some people just don't like the idea that you go up and ring their bell, and the fact of the matter is that it does make me a little bit. The last time I rang people's bells when I was a kid, we used to ring people's doorbells, and then when they would come to the door, we'd run. And I was about 4, 5, and I think that's the last time I actually knocked on doors. So I can't run anymore, so I don't know what that means. Welcome to the Virtual Center today on this Wednesday. Today is the 5th day of October in the year 2016. Once again, we have a beautiful day, but like everybody else, we've got one eye on the weather because there is a storm coming up the coast, or that will be coming up the coast later this week, and it's causing evacuations in South Carolina and massive gasoline shortages as people try to get out of town and try to drive 100 miles or so inland in order to escape the storm. And that's, of course, where we are. We're about 200 miles inland. So the thinking is that if we do get anything from the storm, it'll probably just be the outer reaches of the rain. And, of course, outer reaches of 40 inches of rain could cause some issues here in the mountains. But we'll have to wait and see. We're awfully dry, and we're going to begin to experience forest fire dangers once the leaves start to turn and start to come down this month if we don't get a little moisture. So I just know that we don't want it this way. You don't want it in a hurricane. That doesn't do you much good. Yesterday, as if you were with us, you know that we had the honor of a caller calling in the last half hour, 25 minutes of the program. Our friend Horst from Taiwan called in and had a wonderful discussion. And the reason I say that is because I want to make sure that everybody has the phone number. That's 2 days in a row we've had conversations with more than just me, and it does add so much to the program. If you'll remember, day before yesterday, Agnes joined us in the conversation, and again, I think it's infectious. The more of that you experience, the more you'd like to continue to experience it. So, let me take this opportunity again to encourage you to participate in our program. If you are so inclined. Obviously, I'm not trying to pressure people, and I don't want people just to call and come on the air so that they can say that they're out there or whatever. I appreciate that, but on the other hand, my thinking is that if you take the time to call, it's because you've got something substantive to say. And if you do, then I know for certain that our listeners would benefit from it and would relish the idea of hearing from you. So that's why we have the phone number, and I do encourage you to use it. The number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. And 4676, of course, translate into Horn, H-O-R-N. If you'd like to communicate your thoughts, but at the same time don't want to do it on the air, then by all means, I hope that you'll feel comfortable dropping me an email. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906@gmail.com. And I call your attention again to our Facebook page. And I had mentioned yesterday that based on yesterday's program, and we'll be continuing that today, I did want to put something on Facebook, but I didn't really get the opportunity to do it last night, as you'll hear in a moment. I did mention that I had a speaking engagement last evening as part of the campaign. And I want to share a couple of things from that event with you, because I think it really does indeed pertain to the nature of our program. Obviously the campaign itself is relevant. We had, besides my campaign experience last night, we here in West Virginia had two debates last night. We, of course, had the vice presidential debate between Tim Kaine and Michael Pence, which began at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. But at 7 o'clock, we also had a gubernatorial debate here in West Virginia between the Republican Bill Cole, who's a car dealer here in southern West Virginia, and Jim Justice, who is into coal and agriculture and owns the Greenbrier, the state-of-the-art luxury facility here in southern West Virginia in Greenbrier County. And because of my own experience or my own engagement last night, appointment, whatever, I was unable to watch the gubernatorial debate, and I haven't had the chance yet to pick up a copy of it. I know it'll be available for rebroadcast a number of times, and I do want to see it. Part of the reason I was unable to is because the reaction to the vice presidential debate between Pence and Tim Kaine was extensive and took us well into the night, and much of the conversation on this morning's talk shows related to that debate as well. So it is a month away from the election, and it is campaign season, and we're flying along hot and heavy. And I know that I'm not the only one who kind of has a feeling that if we can get through this, if we can get to November 8th, it'll be a victory. We'll worry about who wins and who loses when that comes. But right now it's just getting there. And I think people are pretty tired of the politics and the political jousting and all the rest of it. On the other hand, it's so darn important. This particular campaign is so important and so different in so many ways from what has preceded it. And I guess a lot of it is attributable to Donald Trump, but not all of it. I think the frustration of so many Americans, the fallout from the recession in 07, 08, the data that we've been living with over the last couple of years on the expansion, the degree of inequality, the unequal distribution of wealth and income in America, the threat that it poses to the republic. We've been all over it here in the virtual center for months, years, in fact. And I really think that a lot of what we're experiencing in this campaign, this election, is reaction to that. It's follow to that. I think people are frustrated and tired and just ready to throw up their hands and say enough is enough, and I can understand that. But at the same time, it's so darn important and serious that it's hard to do that. And then, of course, there are the junkies who just love every minute of it. And for a long time, I'm pretty much one of those as well. But I've got to admit, that, you do get tired after a while. And it's unbelievable. You just keep reading the same things over and over and over again. But everything, as you read, you find that everything seems to contain a new wrinkle or a new idea, or something that you didn't know or hadn't thought about or had forgotten or whatever. So the campaign becomes infectious, and I think that's what we're into. Let me, maybe I guess the best thing to do would be make a comment or two about the vice presidential debate last evening, and I think a lot of people are just now picking it up. I think every pundit in the world is writing about that particular experience last night. Many people believed, I'm one, that it was a little bit out of character, especially for Tim Kaine. Basically, I think we went into last night's vice presidential debate not only believing but knowing that what we had here were two pretty nice guys. Obviously, ideologically and philosophically, they're at opposite poles in many ways. They disagree quite a bit with each other. But the fact of the matter is, they are gentlemen. They are public servants. Both of them have been public servants for a number of years. They've committed their lives to public service. And obviously their ideology helps or tends to define the nature of the public service they want to provide. But I think the issue first, I think the first thing to recognize is that these are two good people who are committed to public service. And what that meant was that the nature of the debate and the fact that each of them was in a position of having to defend the actions and the comments and the campaign of those at the top of the ticket, Hillary Clinton in Kaine's case and Donald Trump in Pence's case, meant that their agenda for last night's debate was pretty much laid out for them. And what it required, at least this is the feeling I had as I watched the debate, what the situation dictated for both of them is a very, very awkward situation. Because in both cases, it seemed to me, these guys were out of character. They were in a position where they were expected to speak and behave in ways that contributed to the political campaign that they're such an important part of, but at the same time took them out of character, in that each of them ended up adopting a persona that really wasn't them. I thought the first thing I noticed was Tim Kaine. I heard one number this morning in one of the commentaries about the debate that this particular report was that they had counted 79 instances during the 2-hour debate of Tim Kaine interrupting Michael Pence, speaking over him, speaking at the same time, criticizing, changing the subject in mid-sentence, to the point that the moderator, Elaine Quijano, on a number of occasions had to urge them to stop talking over each other. And of course, her voice made a third one. So there were situations in that debate where we heard her voice, Kaine's voice, and Pence's voice at the same time, all of them talking at the same time and saying something different, which meant that as a viewer, there was no way you could really get anything out of the conversation itself. So in that sense, I really had a feeling that in Kaine's case, I felt that he was becoming obnoxious, somewhat overbearing. And it was almost as if he was forcing himself to do that, that was the strategy that his handlers had, or his advisors had laid out for him, and he was merely following script. But it was clear that he wasn't comfortable with it. More importantly, and this I think is a positive, I feel it's a positive anyway, these two guys like each other and respect each other. I think it was clear when they first came out on the stage. It was clear at the end of the debate. Their exchanges, their personal contact was much warmer than a traditional handshake. It wasn't the dutiful response of two people that didn't like each other. On the contrary, it was the emotional connection between two people who respected each other. And almost, if body language could really speak, it was almost as if each of them was saying, I'm going to have to say some things to you and about you that you're not going to like. But please understand that I really care about you, and it's not personal. It's just the nature of the game we're in. I kind of picked that up 2 or 3 times during the course of the debate. And to be honest with you, I found it encouraging. If there was one nobody's talking about this particular piece, and maybe that's why I chose it, I don't know. But one of the area that really, the topic in the entire 2-hour debate that I wanted to make a comment on was the very last one, when the issue came up about the very personal issues of right to life and abortion and partial birth abortions and all of that. If you watch the entire debate, you may remember that Michael Pence had some very, very emotional things to say toward the end about the issue of partial birth abortions. And what he was basically saying to Tim Kaine was, even though I think you're a nice guy and I know you're a good Christian and I know you're a godly man and blah, 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 at the same time, I find it difficult to understand how you can condone a life that is almost ready to be born being taken, and being taken in this horrendous way. And then Tim Kaine's anxiety over trying to explain that even though these kinds of things violated his personal faith, at the same time, they were legal. They were the law. And he had taken an obligation to support the Constitution. And with Roe v. Wade, the Constitution, as currently being interpreted, emphasizes the woman's right to choose and make these kinds of decisions. I just had a feeling that both of these, first of all, neither one of these, on this particular issue, it was clear that neither one of them was saying something they didn't really feel. Not just believe, but feel. This was in a very emotional exchange. You could tell that there was a lot of heart, as well as some reasoning that went into the positions of each of them. I think it was a classic exchange of the difference on this particular issue that so divides the nation and has divided it for so long, ever since Roe v. Wade in the 70s. I think it was the early 70s. The fact of the matter is, I found it kind of encouraging. It was almost as if each of them was apologizing to the other for the fact that I'm going to have to say this and you're not going to like it. But here goes. And it kind of made me think, civility is not totally dead. It's almost dead in this campaign. I mean, we've had an awful lot of trouble trying to find it. But I think what we saw last night was an example, at least in some circles, that it continues to be important. And I thought watching these people wrestle with their commitment to being civil on the one hand with each other, and on the other hand doing what they were politically obligated to do, I thought that was both informative and kind of encouraging. And in that sense, I don't think either one of them lost. I did feel that Tim Kaine, because everybody has talked about how much they like Tim Kaine, how much they respect him, and the way he's lived his life, and his commitment to public service, and his commitment to people, and all of that. And I think some of the behavior that he exhibited last night tended to create a little bit of a shadow over that reputation, that very positive reputation he had. But at the same time, I think the reasons for the positive reputation came through, especially at the end. And I think when they shook hands and threw an arm around each other's shoulders at the end of that, I just had a feeling that both of them were just glad it was over. I think they did what they had to do, they felt they had to do, and they probably did it as well as they could have done it. And so depending on how you thought or what you believed going into the debate, the side that you wanted to win won. And both sides could say that. But at the same time, at least as opposed to the first debate, I really do believe that we got some valuable information on some of the issues. I think the one thing these people did was focus on issues. I think the political education element that is such an important part of the whole debate structure itself came through in this debate. I don't think it's going to come through in Sunday night's second debate any more than it did in the first one, because I think the personalities of the two candidates at the top of the ticket are pretty much dictating what happens in their exchanges. I don't think the people, citizens, are going to get the education on issues that they got last night. So in that sense, I thought it was, it was valuable. But that's just my spin. That was my feeling. And I didn't know. I obviously had a preference because philosophically, I have serious questions and serious issues about some of the things that Mike Pence supports and some of the things that he's done as governor, for example. I think he's supported some positions on issues, prevailing wage and right to life, and a number of other things that we're experiencing here in West Virginia. I think the position he's taken on these issues is pretty much in part responsible, at least, for the fact that these issues are still being imposed on people that really, and on states where most citizens don't really understand the full implications of the issue itself and what's behind it. So in that sense, I have some real issues with Michael Pence. I mean, Indiana, if you remember, was the first state that had serious fallout, serious reaction to this religious freedom restoration theme that has come out of ALEC, out of the American Legislative Exchange Council. And Michael Pence was responsible for running it through the gauntlet in the state of Indiana. And Indiana began to lose an awful lot of convention and conference business because of the discriminatory element, the discriminatory side, if you will, of this legislation. That's what North Carolina is experiencing right now. And if you look back and remember, Michael Pence eventually had to support the overturning of that particular legislation because it was costing the state of Indiana a fortune in tourist business and convention business. And so, another thing, and I think we made mention of this here at the Virtual Center some months ago. As governor, Michael Pence took a position on scholarship, particularly in American history, and took a very, very strong position against a prominent American historian that I have long thought an awful lot of. And I really felt that Michael Pence really stepped out of bounds when he took on Howard Zinn and the reputation of Howard Zinn, and the fact that Howard Zinn was his books were making it into curriculums in a number of K through 12 high school history courses, as well as public college courses. And Michael Pence pushed the issue in Indiana and basically got legislation through which made it against the laws of the state of Indiana to incorporate Howard Zinn's textbooks into public history classes in the state. I found that to be, absolutely incorrigible behavior on the part of the governor. So while I'm opposed to many of the issues philosophically, at the same time, I do believe that even though we disagree pretty seriously on issues, I do believe we're dealing with a basically good person here. I think that there's a certain level below which he wouldn't go. I don't think we're seeing that at the top of his ticket at all in the behavior of Donald Trump. So that's kind of my spin on it, my reaction, for whatever it's worth. I obviously would appreciate hearing yours, and if you want to do that, by all means, feel free to call in. We're at 304-663-4676. I mentioned that last evening I had a Meet the Candidates speaking engagement, in an adjoining county, and went to it last night, and it was pretty informative. And let me tell you why. We were given, as we usually are at these events, you're given a very, very limited amount of time to speak. And so one of the things that the pundits tell you when you go to the training sessions for candidates, and each major party has these for candidates for office, one of the things they tell you is that you really need to perfect a short, tight stump speech, because chances are in most of your invitations and opportunities to speak, you're going to be under some sort of a time restraint. And so the one thing you can't do is get up there and wing it, because time has a way of getting away from you, and your time's up before you have the chance to get to the real substance of your comments, if indeed there is any substance. And this was such an experience last night. Each candidate was given 3 minutes to introduce themselves and tell them a little bit about themselves and about their campaign and why they're running and what issues they're focusing on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in that sense, it was pretty usual, pretty normal. It was like several other such experiences that I've had, both in the primary season and a few times in the campaign itself. The difference was that at the end of the speaking, when everybody had a chance to speak, there was a question and answer session. And one of the people in the audience asked a question which is a very relevant question, political question here in this particular region. And it's about the extent to which private oil and gas interests are running pipelines through Appalachia in order to transfer or to transport gas for export overseas to ports, to East Coast ports. Here in West Virginia, there are two such gas lines, two major gas lines. One proposed in the northern part of the state that runs through from western Pennsylvania through West Virginia and into Virginia. And that particular pipeline is being bankrolled by Dominion Energy in Virginia. I think they're based in Richmond. The second one is in the more southern sections of West Virginia. It's the one that is most pertinent to this particular region that I'm in. So therefore, in the counties and districts that my campaign focuses on, this pipeline issue is a very, very important one because there are public meetings on it and there's really emotional sentiment on both sides. Part of the reason is that the gas companies, the builders of these pipelines, are offering fairly generous subsidies to landowners who are willing to have the pipeline run over their particular property. Now, if you can think about it, if you lived in a traditional urban or suburban setting where you had a whole string of houses along both sides of a street, then running a pipeline through your yard when you only have like a quarter of an acre would be unsightly and probably not debatable. But the fact of the matter is, many people in this region, because we are so rural, own large plots of land, 15, 20, 30, 50 acres, if you will. And much of it is mountain land. And so therefore, running the pipeline for many of these people doesn't mean that they're going to have to look out their front window and look at a pipeline. In other words, it'll be relatively invisible. You'd have to go to find it before you'd see it. And the fact of the matter is the companies are offering landowners fairly generous subsidies in order to win access, to gain access to their property rights, to the mineral rights under their property. And the fact of the matter is, many of the local political leaders, because of the nature of West Virginia's spiraling budget, which is spiraling down already in this new fiscal year, which began July 1st, the local newspaper this morning reported that the tax receipts in the state of West Virginia are already something like $86 million behind projections. So the deficit, which was so large at the end of the last fiscal year, continues to expand. And much of the debate, the gubernatorial debate last night, focused on that particular state budget hole or deficit, from what I understand. Many people in West Virginia, many political people in West Virginia, support the pipeline because of the severance taxes that it'll generate for the state economy. These companies are paying severance taxes to the state. And given the budget situation, many people see this, even if they don't like it, as a necessity. Last night, this particular issue came up because the question and answer period at the end of the formal statements began with a question as to how each of the people on the panel felt about the pipeline. whether in fact we supported it or whether in fact we opposed it. And it just so happened that the fellow who happens to be my opponent is a supporter of the pipeline. He's an incumbent. He's a Republican incumbent in the legislature. He's been there for 2 terms, so he served 4 years. And he's the incumbent, and he supports it. And he supports it because of the dent that he believes it'll make in the state's deficit. And as the incumbent, he was pointing to that experience and basically saying, what I've learned in the 4 years that I've been in the legislature is that the budget situation in this state, in this region of the state, is dire, and that our counties depend on subsidies that they receive from these companies. And then he went into a rather long, extended discussion, all of it in response to the question that was asked, about the nature of the West Virginia economy. And once he got into that, I started to foam at the mouth because I just couldn't wait to get up there with my own opportunity to respond. Turns out that what we had was a 40-minute presentation of 3-minute speeches, followed by an hour and 15-minute discussion built on one issue among all the participants. The exchange was exciting, it was emotional, it was informative, and I think that the people who came to listen to last night's exchange really left there with a pretty good idea as to what this particular issue is about, but more importantly, what the different candidates really stood for. In other words, they came to hear the candidates, and when they left, they had indeed heard the candidates. My opponent, myself, we have a young fellow that's running as the challenger for the U.S. Congress from this district, from the 3rd District of West Virginia. And my opponent for the House was the only one of the panel who supported the pipeline. And he gave and as the incumbent, he was given first shot at answering this question. And he immediately went from the pipeline into something a little bit more general about the nature of the West Virginia economy. And basically what he suggested is that given the dire situation that West Virginia is in, especially southern West Virginia, because the decline of coal revenue has hurt this area more than any other, he pointed out that we are in a situation here in West Virginia where we have got to sell whatever we've got that people will buy. That's the phrase I left with. That's the phrase I made up my mind that I would share with you today on today's program here at the Virtual Center. Under the circumstances, we really don't have any option except to sell what we've got that people are willing to buy, to pay for. And of course, the rest of us on the panel kind of looked at each other, and what flashed through my mind was the fact that if that's true, then we might as well all turn to prostitution. Some of us will be successful. Many of us will not be successful. But at the same time, what revenue we generate will temporarily alleviate the budget deficit until the next time around, so to speak. And that's the issue that I took on when I had my opportunity to speak, is the nature of the West Virginia economy, the nature of a colonial economy, the nature of the idea that that's what colonies do, is they basically produce the raw materials for processing elsewhere. And what profits come out of this classic illustration of capitalism at work. What profits go to the processor, not the region or the people who live in the colony itself. The only thing we get out of this is jobs. And when the wealth is gone, the jobs are gone. And if you have been so narrow and so had such lack of foresight that you didn't see the need to diversify your economy, but rather put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, then what you were doing was setting yourself up for a horrendous financial fall, and that's what we're experiencing now. With the decline of coal and the loss of severance money going into the state, the amount of money that coal paid in severance taxes to the state of West Virginia has declined by well over 50% in the last 5 years. And so the state we were the state that really wasn't experiencing that much negative fallout from the recession when it hit in 07 and 08. And I can remember making the comment here at the Virtual Center that the reason West Virginia wasn't suffering under the recession like other parts of the country is because we never really recovered. The recovery, the economic recovery which ended with the recession in 07 and 08 hadn't really occurred here in West Virginia. We hadn't come back. Our economy hadn't come back that much. So consequently, when the economy throughout the nation began to fall as part of the recession, it didn't hurt us that bad because we didn't have that far to fall, very honestly. Basically, then, what last night's discussion ended up being was pretty much an abbreviated version of the issue, the theme that we were into here at the Virtual Center on yesterday's program, and even on Monday's program as well. And it was basically the idea of the political realities in a state which is dominated and owned, if you will, by one particular industry. And this is where we were yesterday, if you'll recall, when Horst called from Taiwan. Namely, that here in West Virginia, there has been and continues to be very little difference between Democrats and Republicans. Most West Virginians believe that it really doesn't matter because there really isn't a lick of difference between the two here in West Virginia. And I found that particular point of view in my own mind, in my own years here, something that I continue to focus on. Because I noticed when I first came here, and I think I've said this before, that many of the people in this state who were Democrats, who were clearly, publicly identified as Democrats, anywhere else that I'd ever lived would have been Republicans. Their positions on issues, their attitudes towards government, their attitudes towards entitlements were much more in line with traditional Republican positions nationally than they were Democratic positions. So I began to question in my own mind for a long time, what is it about West Virginia that has redefined Democrat to the point that here Democrats are really Republicans? And then I began to see it unfold in the last election 2 years ago, and I continue to see it unfold here, because as I've been out campaigning and as I've been interacting with other candidates at speaking events and engagements, I've begun to learn an awful lot of things that I would never have heard of or known otherwise. And one of the things I've experienced are the number of prominent political leaders in this state who regularly change parties. I mentioned that yesterday the speaker at our local Rotary luncheon was the current Republican incumbent in our congressional district. And the fact of the matter is, he has been prominent in the state's politics since the 90s. And I came here in the early 90s. And it wasn't too many years after I was here that I began to run into his name. And he's held a number of different positions at the state level here. He's been in the State Chamber of Commerce and has been an advisor in our local to our local Chamber of Commerce. But over the years, he's been a Republican, back to a Democrat, back to a Republican, and he's changed parties 3 or 4 times. I've also run into situations where people who are currently members of one party have let it be known that they're vulnerable, they're susceptible to changing parties depending on the situation that is presented to them. I ran into a situation 2 years ago in the election, off-year elections in 2014, where one of our prominent Democratic candidates here in this region let it be known, not publicly, of course, not in the press, but privately, that if he wins re-election, if he's reelected, he will change parties. What he was in effect doing was proposing to the Republican Party, to the state Republican Party, that if you don't oppose me for re-election, when I get elected, I'll change and become a Republican. The point what I'm saying here is, many people, citizens, voters, have said over and over again that there really isn't much difference between Democrats and Republicans here. And the behavior of these people switching parties is evidence of it. The more I began to look, the more I began to realize that they're right. That there really isn't that much difference between Democrats and Republicans here in West Virginia. And so consequently, when Barack Obama was elected president in 2008 and then re-elected again in 2012, he was pretty much written off locally here. In West Virginia, the Democratic Party pretty much ran away from their own president. As Republicans continued to attack the Obama administration, Democrats in West Virginia didn't defend him. They basically agreed. They kind of went along and said, we don't like Obama either. We don't like his EPA. We don't like the anti-coal positions. And suddenly this whole idea of the war on coal began to emerge. And what was happening, and this is totally my own interpretation here, I'm not getting this from anybody. This is my own read. But it seems to me what was happening here is that the demise of coal and the shrinking in the number of coal jobs over the last several years was being blamed on the National Democratic Party, on the Obama administration. The fact of the matter is, mechanization, more than anything else, is what has done damage to coal in this economy. Those that were mining coal underground over the years did such a good job that the easily accessible coal, the coal that was easily mined, more important than easily mined, is most cheaply mined at the lowest cost, was pretty much gone. And the coal that is left is much more difficult to mine and much more expensive to mine. And with that reality came mountaintop removal. It became much more efficient and effective for companies to blow the tops off mountains in order to expose the coal. The result was that the number of undergrounding mining jobs began to decline and continue to decline. So in reality, the way that coal was being mined probably had as much to do with the creating of fewer and fewer jobs, the elimination of jobs. But the companies that were engaged in this didn't own up to that. They were looking for a scapegoat, and they found one in Washington. And they were able to create this incredibly effective publicity, PR machine called Friends of Coal. And suddenly, if you were in West Virginia, you had to be a supporter of coal. And the way it was phrased, of course, was, we support our coal miners. We support the culture and the way of life that has defined West Virginia, and we need to come and support and thank our coal miners. But the fact of the matter is, what was being defended much more than coal jobs was the industry. In effect, in supporting coal, you were supporting mountaintop removal, and you were supporting the continued decline in coal jobs. And then in the last several years, when the world economy began to turn against fossil fuels because of the issue of climate change and the felt dangers that it seemed to the science was telling us it was doing to the environment, then as the world began to turn away from coal and the demand for it became less and less, that merely exacerbated a problem that was already underway here. And then along came fracking. And the realization that there seems to be almost unlimited amounts of available natural gas in these mountains. And suddenly, many people began to believe that gas, natural gas, could become West Virginia's 21st century version of what coal was in the 20th century. and West Virginia began to support fracking and to extract natural gas. And the argument was that natural gas was much cleaner than coal. It's not clean. It's not clean energy, but it's cleaner than was coal. And now we come back to the issue of the pipeline. And we come back to the statement that I referred to earlier from last night about West Virginia is in a situation where it has no choice except to sell whatever it has that people will buy. So that's the reason why he and those who think like him support pipelines. But the fact of the matter is there's no greater enemy to coal than natural gas. So in reality, supporting the pipelines is to engage in behavior that will just drive the last nail into the coffin for coal. The same people who support the pipeline support coal. In effect, then, they are talking out of both sides of their mouth. They are contradicting each other. Because the more gas West Virginia produces and transports to the world's markets, the less opportunity there's going to be to market coal. And that's the issue. We've got a couple of minutes left in this first hour, and I don't want to leave this thing hanging. I'd like to kind of leave it at a logical place so we can pick it up after our break when we come back. Let me say then that the major issue here so far is the contradiction between these two forms of energy, neither one of which can be defined as clean energy. In fact, from what I understand, the carbon monoxide that is released with fracking is in the long term a lot more detrimental to the environment than carbon dioxide, which comes from burning coal. I'm not a chemist. I'm not a scientist. I read that. I don't have any evidence on which to believe, to disbelieve it. Seems to me to make sense. The people who say it are people that ought to know. So I go along with that. But the fact of the matter is, I believe, and this is probably a good place to end this discussion, at least until we take our break, and then we can pick it up when we come back. But it seems to me that the issue here is so complicated and so complex but the fact of the matter is, if you are building your economy around the need to sell whatever you have that people will buy, then there has got to come a point at which you don't have anything left to sell anymore. Everybody will be unemployed. There'll be no economy left. There'll be nothing to sell. It seems to me that there's another alternative to addressing the budget, and it's finding ways to generate additional revenue, to grow the economy, to diversify the economy, not to remain totally dependent on the economy that was, but begin to seriously look for alternative ways to generate revenue. And that's the issue that I've pretty much decided to build my campaign on, and that was the point that I made in my comments last night. And when we come back, after we take our break, I want to get into that because it gets back to this issue of Democrats and Republicans again. And it also touches on the issue of idealism that we were talking about yesterday, that Horst called about, which is the David Brooks article on the issue of his so-called article, his feeling that idealism is dead, that this particular campaign suggests that whether it's Hillary or whether it's Donald Trump, the idealism which initially gave rise to both of them is gone. I'd like to suggest a new approach to rediscovering that idealism. And I think that's where I'd like to at least begin in our second hour today. We've just turned the top of the hour. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We're going to pause for a 5-minute break. And I know that Agnes has some good music to play during the interlude. And when we come back, we'll pick up on this topic and continue it. I hope that if you're with us, that you'll stay with us. We'll only be gone for 4 or 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Agnes. I had to turn on my microphone. If you're going to be on the air, you kind of got to have a microphone. You know what I mean? And anyway, welcome to our second hour here at the Virtual Center on this Wednesday. Today is the 5th day of October in the year 2016. And if you are just joining us, we have been talking pretty much about politics. We spent some time on the vice presidential debate last evening, and mostly we've been talking about the local political issues here in West Virginia, specifically the issues of coal versus gas, and the nature of the economy that basically emerged from that reality. And that's really where we are as we go into the second hour, is basically the theme, it seems to me, is going to be the degree to which the nature of a region's wealth, the nature of a nation's wealth, if indeed it applies to the whole nation, or if it just applies to a state or a group of states or just a region of a state. It seems to me that one of the things we've got to address is the reality that the nature of the wealth that is available there pretty much dictates or defines the kind of economic development or economic growth that that region will have. If you are a colonial economy, then you produce wealth for other people. That's what we've already done. That's what the nature of extractive industries is about. That's kind of where we are. That's what we're going to be looking at here for the least part of our second hour on this Wednesday program. And we really are happy that you are with us. And for those of you who have been with us through the first hour, want to thank you for staying with us. I hope that it's been informative. I hope that it will continue to be informative. It seems to make sense to me. And what I mean by that is it's not only that it makes sense, but I think what we need to understand, and I'm talking to myself as well as to you, the audience in this, is that this is what seems to make sense to me. And so as I try to explain it to you, I begin to see the whole story much more clearly than I did prior to the time we came on the air. What I mean is that in explaining it to you, I'm pretty much convincing myself that it indeed does seem to make the most sense. So I need to hear it, is what I'm saying. So if there are flaws in it, if there are things that I'm not considering or things that I should consider, then I do solicit your input. I do encourage you to let me know. If you believe that I'm following a path that leads nowhere, and that I'm wasting my time, and at the end of the road, I'm going to come up empty and have to come back and start all over again. If you know that, then by all means share it with me, because I'd like to know it too. Because I think, like everybody else, I'm just trying to figure it out. And it's very complex. But it needs to be figured out, because we've got to master this. All of us. Not just the people here in West Virginia, but all of us. I think we can tell from the nature of the campaign for President of the United States that citizens all over the country are wrestling with the same kind of problems in their own way. Michigan, Flint, Michigan, is struggling with the issue of clean water. Here in West Virginia, we're doing the same thing. In the Southwest, in the desert, large urban areas like Phoenix and Los Angeles and San Diego are struggling with the issues of water, the issues of fire and drought and torrential rain and all the rest of it. So it seems to me that each region and the people in it, in their own ways, are wrestling with the same kinds of problems. So that's why I believe that this is so important here to discuss. It's not just that West Virginia's situation fits everybody else's situation. It's the fact that the kind of issues you have to raise and the kinds of questions you have to ask and the nature of the places you have to go in order to look for answers is informative. The methodology can work in different areas for different people in different ways, but the methodology itself is important. So I think that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with two things at the same time. We're dealing with the material, the evidence, the factual evidence in this particular region. But we're also dealing with a methodology that can be transferred and transposed onto any number of different economic situations in different parts of the country. I think in that sense, it's relevant. What we're talking about is relevant to everyone. With that, then, I really do invite your input, your reaction, your contributions. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to drop me an email and share your thoughts that way, I would love to hear from you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906@gmail.com. And again, I encourage you to keep an eye on our Facebook page, and I promise you that in the next few days, there will be a posting on the Facebook page that'll deal with aspects of this particular issue, because I want to get this stuff down in writing, because I really believe it's important. When I say that I'm going to focus my campaign on it, what I'm basically suggesting is that more and more I'm going to try to focus and refine on this particular theme. Because I think in this region, this is the theme that promises the greatest return. It seems to me that what I am proposing is a theme that will focus on growing the economy by diversifying it, rather than continuing to cut, and more importantly, continue to sell off everything we've got, every commodity we've got that carries a price tag. I don't think you can build an economy that way. I think that ultimately you're going to run out of things to sell. More likely you're going to run out of things that people want to buy. And so it seems to me that we've got to look for alternative ways to grow the economy. We've got to basically create economic development in this region that fits our needs, our people, our future, rather than continuing to function in a way which has rendered us in the very vulnerable situation that so many people in this region find themselves in now. This a state of helplessness and despair that is fueling a drug problem, it's fueling crime, it's fueling spousal abuse, it's fueling child abuse, it's breaking up families. We've got to get a handle on this. And I think other people are experiencing the same kinds of fallout from the same kinds of situations. Not exactly the same situations, but the same kinds of situation, the same circumstances. And I'm hoping that what we're playing with here is a methodology that will be beneficial to other people in other situations. So with that, let's get back to where we were at the end of our first hour. And that is the degree to which there is a basic contradiction in this region between a rebirth of coal and the expansion of natural gas. It seems to me that if the campaign to blame all of coal's problems, all of West Virginia's financial problems, on the federal government, on Obama's war on coal, on Obama's EPA, and the impossible enforcement rules that it's creating, the clean air requirements that are so difficult for an economy built on coal to meet. All of the ingredients are there to build a campaign on it and define it as a war. But the fact of the matter is, what is defeating coal is so much that is going on within the industry itself. But the federal government is becoming the scapegoat. It's becoming the straw man. We can blame all of the other problems on that one source. And if we can promote that and get people to buy into that, then ultimately the federal government is the cause of all of our problems, rather than the possible answer to some of these problems. And so we have candidates in both parties running on the basis of bringing back coal. And we have those same people advocating the international marketing of natural gas. And what we have here is a blatant contradiction between the two kinds of energy. But the people who are advocating both of these strategies refuse to look at the contradiction. I'm not sure that all of them see it, but I have to believe that some of them do. So for the fact of the matter is, then, we're operating at cross purposes here. But that gets us back to the political question of Democrats and Republicans. And the fact that there doesn't seem to be, as I've heard a number of people say, a lick of difference between one party and the other. I've heard a number of people who have switched parties maintain that. 2 years ago, the major switch was a senator from an adjoining county, Wyoming County, who was elected as a Democrat, became a Republican, and thereby transferred control of the state Senate, which had been in Democratic hands for years, to the Republicans by a margin of 18-16. Those numbers seem to project the importance of this fall's election, because the thinking is it's not going to take much of a change for Democrats to win back the Senate. In the House, the Republican control is much more solid. But given the dire circumstances the state finds itself in, this may be an all-or-nothing opportunity for Democrats to recover control of the House as well. On that one, we'll have to see. But it seems to me the issue of there not being a lick of difference between the two parties is one that we need to focus on, because I always believed that there was a substantial difference. In the position paper that I put out when I decided to run for office, I made the point that I've always been a Democrat. My dad was a Democrat. All the people that I knew growing up were Democrats. And the reason was not just because my dad was a Democrat, am I a Democrat? We grew up believing, not just thinking, but believing, that there was a reason, a significant reason to be a Democrat. And that was because the Democratic Party, and this stems directly out of Roosevelt's New Deal, the Democratic Party is the party that seems to stand for the vision and the ideals that all of us believe that every individual in the society ought to stand for. It stands for people. It stands for the public interest. It defines a mission for government to govern in the public interests of everybody, not just a few, but everybody. It believes that it's based on the principle that people matter. It's based on the principle that people need to have hope. Back to the issue of idealism again. Part of government's job is to govern in a way which generates hope, which gives people genuine opportunities for a better quality of life for them and their children and their grandchildren. That's what it's always been about. That's what it's about to me. Now, we hear an alternative philosophy, which is based on the idea that the success of the many is directly dependent on the few being successful, and therefore government's principal jobs is not to care or worry about the many, but to concentrate on the needs and the priorities of the few. And that drives this whole idea of trickle down. And the idea that if the few are doing well and are generating the kind of profit that capitalism generates, then that profit will be reinvested into the economy, and the expansion of the economy will continue to grow, opportunities will continue to multiply, and the availability of real opportunity for more people will be the result. That's the theory. But the fact of the matter is, we know, and now we've got the evidence, the research tells us, the data tells us, that the system is broken down. Because the fact of the matter is, the few who are getting most of the opportunities are not reinvesting the results of those opportunities, the profits that they are making, back into the economy. On the contrary, they're taking money out of the economy and reinvesting it in offshore accounts, in the arts, in buildings, in museums and hotels. And the expansion in the economy, the growth and multiplication of jobs, that everybody assumes ought to be there with the recovery has not happened. Rather, what has happened instead with the recovery from the Great Recession of 07-08 is that as the recovery has occurred, it has occurred very slowly. But more importantly, the benefits of that recovery are going almost exclusively to the 1%. The benefits are not trickling down. Rather, the benefits are continuing to flow to the few. And in spite of all the talk and all the concerns and complaints, and I think we heard Michael Pence make mention of this more than once last night about the number of regulations, the strangling regulations that occurred. The fact of the matter is we learned from the recession that the places where regulation really needs to be there isn't there and wasn't there. Wall Street. Nobody's going to jail as a result of that recession. We know where it came from. We know why it happened. We know how it happened. But nobody is paying the price. And in fact, we are rapidly moving toward a situation where the same circumstances that produced the recession threaten to do it again. And as we know, the people, taxpayers, were asked to bail out the big guys. And we did it. Now the concerns are that we're going to be asked to do it again. And what we hear is that corporate America is sitting on millions, billions of dollars in cash that is just sitting there and not being used, not being invested into economic expansion. And what we're being told is that the reasons for that are that the tax laws are so stringent in this country that corporations need some sort of a tax holiday. If they're given a break and only required to pay 50%, 33 1/3%, 25% of what they owe in taxes, then that may be enough to bring the money back. That's what Donald Trump is promising if he gets elected. That he'll get that money back into the economy again by cutting the kinds of deals which will make it lucrative for these people to open up their accounts, open up their pocketbooks, as it were, and begin to spend the cash that the economy has generated, but only for them. And the rest of us are being asked to buy into this, to go along with it. It's the financial version of the comment at the event I went to last night of we are in a financial situation which requires that we sell whatever we've got that people are willing to pay for, willing to buy. I would suggest that this particular election is different. Here in West Virginia, it's being touted as the most important, but we hear that with every election. But the fact of the matter is this one is different. And I think the platform adopted by the Democratic Party here in West Virginia is a statement of that difference. For the first time, the Democratic platform in West Virginia focuses on investing in people. For the first time, it appears that the big guys, the coal companies, the gas companies, the pipeline companies, whatever, are in danger of losing their control over government. Why is it that there doesn't seem to be that much difference between Democrats and Republicans in West Virginia? The answer is because there hasn't been. And the reason there hasn't been is because in West Virginia, governments have not been making policy, the private sector has. Government has been doing the bidding of special interests for years in West Virginia. And it didn't matter what party you were, because you weren't making the decisions anyway. So you just basically go. If it suits you personally to become a Republican rather than a Democrat, you do it. They all believe the same stuff. You do the same things. You live the same way. But this time it's different. And I think the pipeline situation is an example of that. In fighting the pipeline, what we're seeing is opposition to traditional power exercise in the state. Supporting the pipeline is supporting the past. It's doing what we always did. It's selling whatever we own that people are willing to buy, no matter what the long-term outcome is for the state. What we see reflected in the pipeline is a change. Let's, for once, not let them call the shots. Let's instead turn government into an engine that reinvests in people. This we mentioned yesterday. New York University research for the United Nations has generated data which proves beyond a doubt that over the entire developed world, those nations that are deficient in natural resources have no alternative but to base their economic development on their own people. The only capital that these nations deficient in natural wealth have is human capital. So therefore, economic development in those nations is principally driven by the need to invest in their own people. Australia, Taiwan, as examples. But the data also shows that those regions of the world which are blessed with natural resources, coal, timber, gas, whatever it might be, the nature of that wealth tends to define economic development in those regions. If your economy is going to be built around extracting the natural wealth and selling it to anybody out there who'll buy, then that becomes economic growth. That becomes economic development for you. That industry, that process of extracting and marketing your wealth becomes the definition of economic development for you. Expansion is extracting more wealth and selling more. But by definition, diversifying the economy and not falling into the trap of putting all your eggs in one basket would seem to be counterproductive. Why would you do that? Why would you invest in anything other than what you have that people are desperate to buy? So by definition, the success of the industry dictates that resources won't go anywhere else. The reason that the pre-Civil War Southern economy was built around cotton was because nobody in their right mind would invest in anything else. The world's market for cotton was big and growing, and the only way to make real money was in cotton. To invest in anything else was stupid. It was counterproductive. Why would you do it? The result is that the marketing of cotton drives Southern economy, dictates what the entire Southern economy is about. If the international market for cotton prices drops, the entire Southern economy goes into recession because that one industry controls everything. That's what we're having and experiencing here in West Virginia. If you're going to turn it around, you got to start investing in other things. And the major thing that we've got as a point of diversification is our people. And what we've got to do is begin to invest in them like we've never done before. And that means turning education into what gubernatorial candidate Jim Justice calls an economic engine for development in West Virginia. If we can invest in our people and enhance their skills and grow their skills and their attractiveness to industry, then by definition this region will become a magnet for entrepreneurs. It will become a mecca for those looking to invest in the expansion of their businesses, because this region features not only the skilled workforce, but features the kind of economic engine that will work with that workforce, that will work with employers to continually expand the attractiveness of the region. In effect, we will begin to turn this state into the kind of brain hub that our economist friend from Stanford talked about on NPR when he talked about brain hubs, the kind of growth areas like Silicon Valley that lift everybody in the community because they become dynamic and vibrant. You'll recall the quote that we looked at several days ago here at the Virtual Center on these brain hubs. Moretti says, I think infrastructure investment, roads, bridges, railroads, etc., might have positive effects on economic growth. But I think that by far the most efficient way to increase economic mobility is to invest not in physical infrastructure, but in the human capital of the American worker, meaning their education and their skill. I think most economic studies point to the fact that the dollar spent, the public dollar spent, in investing in education as some of the highest return, both for workers and for society, relative to pretty much any other public investment we can make. So I think investing in pavement, bridges, roads might help. But investing in education, training, and skills will help much more. That's what the platform of the Democratic Party promises in this state. It's not going to happen in 2 years. It's not going to happen by this time next year. When you're talking about investing in people, you're talking about a process that's going to take a long time. It's a process that should have been begun a long time ago. We didn't do it. And I think we've kind of suggested as to why we didn't do it. But we've got to start doing it now, and we've got to do it fast, and we've got to make it work. No longer can we continue to allow our institutions of higher education to scholarship the best and the brightest from our high schools and ignore the education and skill needs of the vast majority of people in the community that aren't valedictorians and salutatorians in their graduating classes. We need to educate the C students, the C minus students, the D students. We can't continue to render these people useless and continue to look at them as non-contributors to the economy in the state. Because if they don't contribute to it, then they become takers from it. And no economy can expand and grow if it has to support an entire legion of people who can't find jobs, who have needs, who are abusing drugs, committing crimes, breaking up families, beating up women, and all of these other things that we see as manifestations of the anger and the frustrations and the despair that overtakes more and more of our communities. This is not the negative situation that everybody talks about and that everybody complains about. Believe it or not, this is the golden opportunity. This is an opportunity to turn things around. This is an opportunity to bring real revolution to this region. This is an opportunity to finally make government what government always could have been and what government might be, which is the engine, the guide, the supplier, the supporter that makes all of these things possible. It enlists its citizens, not just the wealthiest citizens, not just the smartest citizens, but all citizens, into, in effect, a community army, a legion of producers, all of whom recognize that we're on a mission. We're going to lock arms together, the rich and the poor and blacks and whites and men and women and gays and all of us. And we are going to march forward into a new future where people matter and people count and work brings dignity. No more of this stuff of cutting wages in a state where people can't even find jobs. And you look at the few people that do make a good living, primarily the trade unions, and you eliminate prevailing wage and you cut their salaries. In an economic situation like this, you're reducing the salaries of the only people that are able to make it in this kind of an environment. And what you're saying is, what many of these politicians are saying is, it's not fair that these 10% of union members make these high salaries when everybody else can't even get a job. No, what we'll do is we'll take away their high salaries, and then nobody will be able to live on what they make. That's progress? That's a solution? That's a disgrace. I think that's what we're into here. That's what this platform is about. That's what the Sanders campaign was about. Government's job is to make it possible for everybody to succeed. Obviously, everybody can't succeed in the same ways, to the same degree. We know that. We are not a socialist, communist country. We know that. But everybody can become empowered if we give the skills, if we educate people to the point that they can educate themselves. They can recognize and discover what their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, where their opportunities are, where their threats are, and provide them with the kind of support and the kind of encouragement that they need to do it for themselves. Then the drug problem will disappear. The crime problem will disappear. People will neither have time nor the inclination to do drugs. They're going to be too busy. They're going to be planning for a future that they are proud to put out there for their own kids. This is an economy, this is a nation that has grown and prospered in unbelievable ways because it is a nation that has offered opportunity and freedom to people. What the hell happened to us when we began to lose our focus and stop recognizing that it's our people that have brought us to where we are? Not our corporations, not the multimillionaires, it's people. And somehow we've allowed the few to basically say, we're the ones who create jobs. Government doesn't create jobs, we do. So therefore, tax policy has to be written in such a way that we get the breaks. You need to give us the kind of incentive we need to make the economy we preach work. Think about that. We're the free enterprise guys. We're the ones that buy into freedom and capitalism, unregulated capitalism. We're the ones that preach Adam Smith. We're the ones that preach small government. We're the ones that preach economic expansion and growth and free trade and all of these other things. So therefore, you need to give us everything we want and trust us to so invest and spend that there will be opportunity for everybody else. But you can't make us do that. You don't have the right to do that. Because my right to my property is a natural right. My heavens. Think about this. And here in West Virginia, we are right at the crossroads of these kinds of decisions. That's what this election is about. It's an election which will bring us into a new future, or it's an election which will imprison us into a past which will take us nowhere. A past which we will be required to sell whatever we've got that people are willing to buy. That, it seems to me, is what the issues are on the table in this campaign nationally and in this campaign locally. I think it's exciting. I think it's important. I kind of hope that other people will buy into this as well. I'm not selling a theory here. I mean, I kind of am, because I really think that this is important. But I'm not trying to impose it. I'm not trying to sell it as the only game in town. I'm saying, does this make sense? Is this something that seems to make sense? Do the things that didn't make sense begin to now, if you put them into this context, if you begin to ask these kinds of questions. What kind of questions? It seems to me that one of the things that this story tends to make very clear is that the nature of wealth dictates everything that grows out of that wealth. In other words, if your wealth is in what you've got that other people will want to buy, then your entire economic growth mechanism, the entire strategy, your economy, must be built around extracting and marketing what you've got that other people are willing to buy, to the exclusion of everything else. I would suggest to you that is the definition of British colonial policy. That is the definition of the colonial policy of every nation state during the early modern period. Found colonies claim the wealth that exists in those colonies, whatever it might be, for the nation you represent, and then go in there and exploit the local labor and build the entire economic mechanism around the need to extract that wealth and transport it back to the nation you work for. And if you're on the receiving end of that, if you're one of the leaders in colonial America, if you're one of the patriots, so-called, that's the worldview you've got to deal with. What that means is whatever you might want to do locally, which contradicts that game plan, is going to be prohibited by law. You're going to be denied the freedom to do the things that you want to do or that you feel you need to do or should do, because it violates the big picture, so to speak. So in a sense, by severing the connection with the mother country, you make it possible to establish control over your own wealth, over your own process of economic development. It doesn't mean that the people at the bottom who do the work are going to notice any change. What they're going to notice is there's a different boss. The orders are coming from a different place. But their way of life doesn't change. Unless you reach a world like we are in the 21st century, a world of international competition, driven by technology, driven by access to information, driven by the social media, where everybody becomes a player in the entire process of making decisions. It seems to me that if you're in that kind of a world, you've got to find a way to redefine economic development in such a way that everybody becomes a participant. That's what the founders gave us, was a republic with the opportunity to do just that. We've got the political structure to make that happen for the 21st century. It seems to me that what we're contesting here in this last month before the election is the right to initiate that process and make it happen. I would suggest to you that from that context, we get into the issue of the establishment. Seems to me we've got to make a decision as to which direction we best go in order to keep this process going in the right direction. Will Donald Trump do it? Will Hillary Clinton do it? Did Hillary Clinton learn enough from Bernie Sanders and from those millions of people that came out to support him that she began to recognize some of the realities of what we needed to do? If she did, then she's our person. If she didn't, if she's a prisoner of Wall Street and to continue going to do the bidding of Wall Street, then we'd be right back where we were before. So I think these are the kinds of questions that all of us need to ask. And I think we need to begin to ask them soon. We're at 56 minutes after the hour. We've got less than 4 minutes to go in our program today. So obviously we don't have enough time to shift gears and go into something else. Let me just make one additional comment before we go. And this, I don't know that this is anything new. It's just a way to emphasize or perhaps underline the reality of one of the things we talked about. I'm thinking back to Enrico Moretti's idea of brain hubs. And we looked at his writings from his book on the geography of jobs. What kinds of things are able to generate what he calls brain hubs? What do they have to have in order to become operative, to become functional and self-sufficient? What kinds of things, the psychological things, drive Silicon Valley? And I think the one thing we need to recognize is that when Moretti is talking about the creation of brain hubs, he's talking about a role for government which is quite different than the role that we hear talked about all the time. He's talking about a redefinition or a redirection, if you will, of government's priorities. From the corporations which drive the local economy into the development of the people who live there. I think that what Moretti is talking about is exactly what this story reveals to us. I think that's an important point. We have reached the point where we need to kind of prepare to exit the Hit On Radio Network for this week here at the Virtual Center. We're at 58 minutes after the hour. I want to thank you for your willingness to stay with us. I hope that this has been informative. I hope it's been interesting and informative at the same time. I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Bob Kincaid, Agnes, and the rest for giving us the opportunity to present this kind of a program here on a regular basis. I hope that you have a wonderful evening, a wonderful rest of the week. I hope that the storm doesn't bother or hurt anybody and that everybody is able to weather it, so to speak, no pun intended. And that next week, at the beginning of the week, we can get back together again here at the Virtual Center. Thank you so very, very much for your attention and your willingness to support the network and this program. I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you.